Affording the archiving, the title was A Big Challenge, Web Archiving, a Big Challenge, because affording the archiving of the Spanish web looked very hard when we started, and it is still a big challenge. But I want to send this message. It is affordable, step by step. As a preliminary note and background, just to mention that one of the main missions of the national libraries is preserving the documentary heritage of their countries. But with the explosion of internet, of the documentation online, the scenario changed dramatically, and then a new challenge showed up. A considerable part of the heritage we have to preserve wasn't on physical devices anymore, but online. So, how to collect and preserve the digital documentary heritage? Going a little bit back on time, in 1996, Brewster Kahle founded Internet Archive. In San Francisco, with the aim of building the biggest internet library in the world. And since then, the most important libraries and other heritage institutions like university libraries, archival, national archives, assumed that this ambitious goal was part of the missions, and they had to start collecting and preserving the online information. In 2003, the UNESCO published their guidelines for the preservation of digital heritage, warning about the risk of information disappearance, calling for urgent action of all parts involved, editors, institutions, governments, asking for cooperation and also for legislation to back and cover this task. In that year, also the Iipc was founded, the International Internet Preservation Consortium. Christine Sigurdsson talked about us before. And the main mission was to build a cooperation environment that gathers the main web archiving institutions in the world, and where members share knowledge and experiences, help each other, build common tools, and provide valuable advice to those members less experienced. So the National Library of Spain in 2009 became aware of this need, the need to afford the task of collecting online information as part of its mission of preserving the Spanish documentary heritage. But by that time, we didn't have the required resources to afford this with our own means. So we decided to contract with Internet Archive the archiving of the Spanish web. So they did for us 8 .es domain crawls from 2009 to 2013, and 2 selective crawls about the general elections in Spain in 2011, and 1 on the topic of humanities in general. They ran these crawls on behalf of the National Library of Spain, and although the result was stored in San Francisco, the collection belonged to the National Library of Spain, and finally was transferred to the library in 2014. And we also so we have from that part of the project, the result is 111 terabytes of information archived. Also in 2009, the National Library of Spain decided to become a member of the Iipc, what was a very important step for us for the future of our project. Since then, the library was researching for the most appropriate web archiving tool to adopt to run our own crawls. In parallel, a new legal deposit law in Spain was being drafted to consider online information on scope of the legal deposit, and it was enacted in 2011. But these specific materials, websites and online publications, needed a specific regulation, and this had the format of a royal decree derived from the law that was enacted in 2015 to specify a special way to manage this non-print legal deposit. the regulation of the non-print legal deposit has specific characteristics. It is different from the legal deposit of physical devices. And now, first of all, the initiative is not on the side of the editors, but on the libraries that decide the priorities of deposit. It is impossible to establish well-defined boundaries, and the libraries have to choose what to preserve according to their priorities. There are no conditions related to language, no matter the language, because in Spain we have several official languages, but there are some other websites in languages, smaller languages, not official, but that contain important information we don't want to miss, we don't want to lose. So no languages, there is no boundary related to language. There are no conditions related to server location, which is very important, or domain, this has been tackled before, or kind of access, whether it's free or restricted, it doesn't matter. So if it's in the scope of a legal deposit, because we consider, the libraries consider there is heritage documentation, heritage information that has to be preserved, it doesn't matter. So we have a legal coverage to capture or ask for the deposit of information, whether free or restricted. The only documents that are excluded, specifically excluded, are emails, private networks like intranets that are not available online, directly online, on files including personal data. All the rest is in scope. Okay? But some very important characteristic is exhaustiveness is impossible. It is discarded. There is a huge amount of information that is considered heritage, Spanish heritage. So our goal is to get the biggest collection as possible that reflect the Spanish online information. And regarding the procedures to get this non-print legal deposit, automatic crawling is the web archiving is the first one. And when there is any problem for that, we ask the web administrators to let us crawl their sites. So we ask them to let us in and collect. And when the automatic crawling is not possible for the specific characteristics of the documents, databases, or restricted access with password or registration, we ask the editors or managers of the publications platforms to transfer the publications to the library, most often, so far, via FTP. So, what did we do? Thanks to the valuable advice and support of some colleagues at the Iipc, in 2014, the library decided to adopt NetArchive Suite, a set of open source tools created by the National Library of Denmark. Heritrix, the web crawler Heritrix, is inside. And then a group of users was formed with the National Library of France, the National Library of Austria, and the National Library of Sweden. And after deploying the infrastructure, we started running our own crawls. So what do we crawl? We use a mixed approach, combining bulk crawls of the .es domain and selective crawls. So the domain crawls are run one per year. So we crawl 1,900,000 domains. That is what the .es domain contains. 1,900,000 domains, and once a year. And the selective crawls are on different events, such as elections, the abdication of the King Juan Carlos I, terrorist attacks in Catalonia, or of course COVID-19, which is now a collection as big as one domain crawl. So very big so far. And we have also topics like national politics, environment and climate change, traditions and folklore, or gastronomy, which is a very important topic in Spain. And we also have special collections for autonomous regions, because in Spain, administrative is divided into regions with autonomy and competencies on legal deposit. So I'll show you a little later how does it works. So we have so far 1 petabyte of information, and it's growing like 200 terabytes per year. So, but we started, I'll explain that we started just one of us with the project. So what kind of requirements? I'm going a little faster because I think it's 9-10 minutes left. Policy, legal framework, infrastructure, team, and tools. So first of all, we need a clear policy. What's in scope? So the legal framework helped us. What's in scope? Although it isn't easier to determine what is in scope and what are the priorities, this changes from one institution to another, from one country to another, depending on the available resources, the legal framework, etc. Is something to take into account also is this task part of the mission of the institution, which is very important to fix the policy? What collections should we create? That depends on very different issues like resources, collaboration, etc. What must be the frequency of crawling? As before, Daniel was asked about that. It depends. It depends on. For the domain crawl, we usually do just 1 per year, but for serials, press, we have a big collection that runs every day, but we have only 2 collections, 2 daily collections, and the rest of them depends. Sometimes once a month, or twice a year, or 1 per week. Or when we are collecting or crawling the information of general elections. So the frequency increases when the election day is closed, and we launch the whole crawl like twice a day. And budget, of course, what is the available budget, and that means a lot. And another thing is, do we have any collaborators? So, regarding the legal framework, as I said before, is there any legal mandate that covers this task? Do we have to ask for permission to crawl? Is there any access restrictions? These are questions that depend on the institutions. Regarding infrastructure, this is very important. We need a minimum number of crawlers. We started with 30, but this didn't allow us to run a domain crawl. So when we launched our first crawl in 2014, we only launched a selective crawl. We had to wait until having 70 servers available to run our first domain crawl. So we have 40 crawlers dedicated to selective crawls and 70 dedicated to domain crawls. So in total, 110 web crawlers to run our web collections. We also have a certain processing capability is required, and of course enough storage. But it's the minimum part of the whole problem. Talking about team, regarding the team, there's no ideal scheme. You can have part or full-time staff, so as far as we see that. But of course, talking about web curators, what we call web curators are the librarians or the archivists in charge of the collection, selecting the information to preserve. So it's, of course, recommendable to have them full-time. you can have part or full-time staff, the same for IT people, and you need a team of librarians or archivists that curate the content. That's what we call web curators. We have at the National Library of Spain is a chief of project. I'm going to show you. What we have the National Library is a chief of project and 2 teams, web curators and IT people. We have 4 web curators full-time and 2 IT people part-time, but also some interns and some hired staff, mainly on the IT side. And we also have part-time web curators in several library departments that take care of special web collections related to the library collections like fine arts, ancient and rare books, music and audiovisuals. And as I mentioned before, a special team of part-time web curators at the regional libraries, which are very important. But at the beginning of the project, we were just 1. So it is possible to start with very short resources and keep on growing. And lastly, tools. It is important to choose a tool that better fits the way the library is organized, the available resources, etc. As I said before, we use the NetArchive Suite set of tools, but for the librarian to easily manage their web collections with no specific IT knowledge, we use a layout of the National Library of France in the framework of the Iipc collaboration shared with us, which is Busy Web, building collections on the web, where the web curators manage their own collections, add URLs to crawl, specify frequency and depth of crawl, and also describe the content they want. This is a list of sites of one of our collections. And also describe the content they want to be crawled, a sort of librarian description, not a traditional librarian description, but a sort of librarian description with topics and keywords and so on. Once the tuning is done, the administrators transfer the details to NetArchive Suite that launches the crawl at a determined date and time. So, as I think I underlined, cooperation is especially important for such kind of projects. Cooperation with other international institutions and associations, and cooperation with national institutions. In our case, is especially important the cooperation with regional libraries in Spain. An important topic is the access we can offer to our users. It depends on the copyright legislation of each country. As far as the National Library of Spain is concerned, this access is so far restricted to the library premises and also to the regional libraries premises. Nevertheless, the directive of the copyright in the digital single market has just been transposed to the Spanish legislation, and this opens some new possibilities and exceptions for heritage institutions that we have to study in detail yet. Recently, we have a use case of our web archive to tell. The National Supercomputing Center is working on model language programs of artificial intelligence and needed big corpus of data and text. So the Spanish web archive is the biggest one of these characteristics in Spain. So the National Supercomputing Center has developed a tool called Maria, but this is a Spanish language model system trained on the Spanish web archive. But still, there is a lot ahead to do. We want to offer a better access, not only a wider access, allowing the access to the content via internet, but also offering more search possibilities like full text search, which is not available for the Spanish web archive yet. I mention again the directive of the European Council, as I think it opens new perspectives. And one of the most challenges is the long-term preservation for the web archives in Spain too. So, thank you.
What's your overall opinion about NetArchive's youth? When we tested it, it seems to us really complicated. The access and the proxy server solution, how it worked. Maybe it have developed further.
Maybe I'm not an IT, but I think we are quite happy with that. Yeah, our IT people too. Since we started in 2014 with using NetArchive Suite, we haven't had the need to move or to search for some other crawler or tool. Okay. So it's okay. But we experience the need to add a layer on NetArchive Suite for the web curators to manage the collections without touching the specific tool. So that's part of the IT people. And then we use BusyWeb for the web curators to manage the collections and transfer all the specifications we want to, the sort of orders for the robot through BusyWeb to NetArchive Suite. Mm-hmm. And it's very helpful for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
I kolejne pytanie.
I have a question about how was it decided which web pages will be crawled for regional, for topical, for event, and so on? Was it manual decision or AI was involved?
It's a manual decision. This is a part of our policy. So when it's something, general elections is something. Elections are something very common in all web archives, but some others like special events or COVID or the abdication of a king or things like that are part of our policy. And when we are talking about other topics like national politics or things like that, it depends also on the on the resources we have, on the team we have, and when we talk about regional collections, it depends on them. So we share with them our tools through an administrative network of the Spanish administration that is shared. We shared everything with them. They access directly to BusyWeb, and they manage their own collections, selecting the information they think it's interesting for their specific region. So they are responsible of the legal deposit in our regions. So they choose what they consider is more important. And then it depends on the regions. Some of them want to prefer to focus on a high level of quality assurance, and they have a short collection, let's say 100 websites. And some others are adding sites all the time, and they have a collection of 3,000 websites, even when they are a small region, just one province, for instance, in Spain. It has the biggest regional collection. So it depends on their priorities.
Okay, that's interesting. Decentralized approach, right?
Yeah, decentralized approach.
Each area decides. And
sometimes we can suggest something that we, with our web curator's eyes, can say, oh, this is important for this community, and they didn't realize, they didn't ask us to collect that. We can maybe suggest, so this is the cooperation, we can suggest, or we can add it if someone cannot do that. But even when the pandemic began, they were working on BusyWeb from home when they weren't to work, when they didn't go to work. So we keep the cooperation online with.
And you mentioned 1 million websites, if I recall. How does it compare to entire web of Spain?
This is the .es domain. The .es domain, the list of .es domains is around every year. We have the list every year to run our domain crawl. and is around 1,900,000. But we don't know how big the Spanish web is, because the rest of information is in other domains like .com or .org or .net. So we cannot have the whole size of the Spanish web. That's why when we established the non-pre-legal deposit law, the royal decree, we couldn't establish limits regarding the domains, because we have a lot and .com. So the web curators are the ones that have to choose. We have heritage information and information that we think it has to be preserved related to Spain.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a favor to ask and also a question. So we're all the time trying to reach the researchers. So I could ask you if you can go backwards to your presentation. We'll talk about Maria.
Okay.
And tell us the story. How did the researchers found the Spanish Web Archive and to establish this collaboration? Okay, just a second. Okay, you're going to help me a lot with this slide.
I can share the presentation. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. The question was, how did they find the Spanish Web Archive? How was this collaboration? Because the problem that we have sometimes that the researchers don't know that we have this data, we don't reach the researchers. So what's the story of this collaboration?
Okay, the Spanish government launched a plan of language technologies of natural language processing some years ago. And there was the Economic Affairs Ministry and some institutions like the Cervantes Institute, the Royal Academy of Language, and the National Library of Spain were involved. They want us to participate. They want us to provide documentation and corpus of data and these kind of things to work on that. And then in this environment, the supercomputing center, the National Supercomputing Center, that was connected with the plan of language technologies of the Ministry of Economic Affairs, was very interested on the corpus of data we had. So that was they have researchers that are training the models, but it was sort of institutional starting point.
So it means, if I understood correctly, that you already have some kind of strategy to disseminate the Spanish Web Archive.
Yeah.
With other organizations, right?
Yeah, we try, but sometimes, as you said before, never is enough. So you are explaining all the time, going to to libraries, to forums, to conferences in Spain, and with press releases and these kind of things in Twitter. But all the time you discover that this is not known at all. So, but step by step.
A very impressive project. Concerning the last question on dissemination, I think that you are just a treasure for every scientist. And the only problem is that the treasure is closed. While in the contemporary humanities, the most recent dominating paradigm of research is distant reading. And in distant reading, you have to have access to quite a large portion of material in order to process it using computer methods. And typical way of conducting such research recently is just to go to Google, search for interesting web pages, and crawl them by themselves. And so a lot of such research is going around you. And so you mentioned the last slide that there are some works towards opening a little bit. So
Yeah.
do you think that would be in some future possible to really serve as the distant reading paradigm of digital humanities?
Yeah, I think first of all, this directive of the European Union that is allowing us to offer our data for data mining and for research specifically. And I think there is an exception for heritage institutions also to offer this content for research purposes. So we have to explore in detail because, as far as I know, it's a general framework, not very specific, and we have to be sure that it's legally possible to give access online to our archive. But what we did with the Supercomputing Center is send them part of our works, not everything. They took only 570 terabytes.
Give us the rest.
And the process of transferring the data wasn't easy either. So they offer us their center to process everything there. I don't know if we'll launch next crawls from there, but let's see, there is a lot of questions to be solved.
Thank you very much.